So last time we talked about, we were talking in section 3.1, we were kind of driving towards being able to graph these sine and cosine functions. I asked you to work on worksheet 1 as your assignment. Did you? Okay, sure. Do you guys have questions on that part? So
did we have to? I wrote down just
worksheet 1. Yeah, you wrote down what?
Just directions, not the ones that I didn't say like no reflection, no whatever.
That's okay. If it's nothing and you didn't write anything, then that's okay. Not a big deal. I always write it just so you guys know that, like,
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you had.
I'm considering that, but I wouldn't mark it wrong if it wasn't there. Anybody with questions from chapter 3, worksheet 1 that you guys would have done for homework? Yeah, I think that's probably what we're mostly interested in right now. Can I do number 1? Yes. Can you? So again, like everything else, I'm going to start by trying to write this in kind of that standard transformation form. So it's really easy for me to identify the A, C, H, and K. So if I look at that, the negative out front is really like a -1 for A. There's no coefficient on my X, so I know that the C is just 1. The H needs to be a minus, so if I minus a -2, that'll give me the +2, so K is -2. H is -2, and there's nothing added at the end, so the K is 0. So the amplitude is 1. The period is 2 pi. The midline is y equals 0. And the frequency is 1 over 2 pi. And then if I were to describe the transformation, we have no reflection on the y-axis because the C value is positive. We have no horizontal dilation because the C value is equal to 1. We do have a reflection on the x-axis because the A is negative, but we don't have any vertical dilation because the absolute value of A is still 1. Since the H is negative, we're going to be going left and then 2 units. And since the K is 0, we have no vertical shift. So again, the critical piece is that we're able to write our function in that standard transformation form and then pull off the values for A, C, H, and K. Without those, you can't really get any of the rest of it correct, right? Or you're going to get parts wrong anyways if you can't get the value for H correct or something. You can get stuff wrong. But once you get the values for A, C, H, and K, it's basically like plugging those numbers into formulas and writing down the classifications. Should be pretty easy from there, right? Okay. So last time we were talking about how to go from an equation to a graph. Today we're going to be talking about doing the opposite. right? So today we're going to be talking about going from the graph back to an equation. So to remind us, let's remind ourselves what these what the definitions were for this amplitude, midline, period, because these are going to be really kind of important for us. Sometimes technology. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this thing to. I see. That's my fault then. Oh boy, that's big. All right, so we remember that like the midline was that horizontal line that kind of divides the graph in half, where like half of the graph is above the midline and half of the graph is below the midline. The amplitude is the distance from any extrema back to the midline. So whether it's from a maximum back to the midline or from a minimum back to the midline. And then the period is like the horizontal length or the distance for our one full cycle. So like say we go from minimum to minimum. That's one period. Or you could go from max to max, or you could go from midline point to the other midline to another midline point, presuming that you got both an up and a down in between. Right? So I could do like a period from here to there, or you could do from like there to there. Any kind of full cycle is going to be fine. You guys kind of see what I'm saying there? So let's keep that in mind and kind of work through an example of how to do this, right? So let's do an example here. So let's take a graph and try to figure out what's going on. So if I take a look at this graph, so this is clearly some sine or cosine function, right? Because it looks like a wave. First thing I want to do is identify where the midline is. So if I look at this graph, where does it appear the midline is? At the x-axis, great. So that means that the midline is y equals 0. And that in turn tells me, since the midline is y equals k, that k is equal to 0. We just got one of them down, right? Midline is k, y equals k. So if the midline's y equals 0, the x-axis, then k just has to be 0. Right? Let's do the amplitude now. So that looks like the maximum right there. Everybody agree with that? If I count, this point is at y equals 2, and the midline's at y equals 0. So how tall is that amplitude? It's 2 units, right? If I went from 0 to 2. So far, so good. And what does that tell me then? The amplitude, I remember, is the absolute value of A. So I know the absolute value of A is 2, or rather that A is plus or minus 2. Not sure which one yet. So far, so good. Okay, let's look at the period. So the period is going really from this midline point here all the way to that midline point there. So how far is that? If I started at negative 2 pi down here, and we ended at positive 2 pi over there, how much period did we cover? 4 pi's. And I remember that the period is 2 pi times the absolute value of c. So the absolute value of c then has to just be 2, or c has to be plus or minus 2. So far, so good. Times the absolute value of c. That's how we find the period. Right, I'm just move this over for a second. Drop this stuff in. So again, I'm just, oops, that's not where I wanted that to land. Oh boy. Over here, please. So I'm just kind of referencing again these formulas from last time. Remember we said these were good note card things to go in. So those are the, I'm using the definition for the midline period amplitude to find the place in the picture to figure out the value. And then I'm plugging that then into the formula to solve for the coefficient, the A, C, H, and K kind of stuff. So far, so good? Okay. So we need still to get H, we need to figure out whether the A and C should be positive or negative, respectively. And we need to decide whether we should write this as a sine function or a cosine function. But after that, we're good. We're like halfway there, right? But the only thing we know for sure is k. All right. So let me zoom in here a little bit. So we have, let's summarize here. We know A is plus or minus 2. We know C is plus or minus 2. And we know that K is 0. So we still need to know the sign for A and C. We need to know H. We need to know whether we're going to do a sine or a cosine. All right, so let's start kind of checking off some of these boxes here. All right. And I'm doing this like really slowly and like writing down a lot more than you will once you get used to doing this. But it's the first time through, I want to kind of really write down a lot of our thought process here rather than just saying it. So if you go back and look at this, that it's still informative for you, right? That there's not a lot left off the page. Just so you know, if you're like, oh boy, this seems like it's going to take a long time. It doesn't have to. Once you get good at this, it will not take this much time and this much writing. But it's the first time, and it can be really difficult getting the hang of this, so I want to go slow and make sure that we're okay. All right, so here's the dealio. A and C are both plus or minus. Turns out that we can write a correct answer just worrying about one of them. So my advice to you is that we're just going to always choose C to be positive. You can do it by choosing C to be negative, but I think it just makes life a little bit more complicated. I'm always just going to pick C to be positive. Everybody's okay there? Okay. Now I'm going to decide whether I want to do this as a sine or cosine. I'm going to do it both ways and then talk about like when I would choose, if I'm given the option, like which one I would choose to do. But we'll do both of them here. Typically the question would ask you just to write it one way or the other, or in any, like do one or the other. Or do this specific one, but let's talk about how to do both of them. So we'll do one as a sine function and one as a cosine function. Okay. First thing I need to do is decide whether the A should be positive or negative. So I'm going to go back and remember what the parent function for sine looked like. Try to do a little bit better job there. It's better. So that's kind of what our parent function for sine looked like, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify this midline point. And I notice here that we go from a minimum to a midline point to a maximum. Everybody's okay with that? So I'm going to go ahead and find a midline point now in my graph. Seems like this would be the obvious choice, right? That's the only midline point where I can see what's happening before and after it with. Everybody agree? So if I look here, I'm going minimum, midline point, maximum. Everybody agree? So let's show what we have. So for my parent function sine, 0, 0 is a midline point with a minimum that comes before it and a maximum that comes after it. For our transformation, zero, 0 is also a midline point. A minimum comes before it, a midline comes after it, and a maximum comes after it, correct? Is that what we saw? Yeah. Because these two parts are the same, tells me that A is positive. So far, so good. And now I remember from graphing that I can take any point from the parent function and transform it by doing to a point on the resultant function by doing cx plus h, ay plus k. So we know that the point 0, 0 from sine is going to go to the point 0, 0 in our transformed function. And we know that the c was 2. The h we're not sure on yet. The a we said was 2, and the k is 0. So we have that, right? Oh, let's put the zeros in. So when I plug in 2 for c, 2 for a, 0 for k, yikes, and then 0 for x and y, I have here that h comma 0 should equal 0, 0. So what's h then have to be? It has to be 0, right? So now we have everything, correct? So we know A is 2. We know C is 2. We know H is 0. We know K is 0. Or if we combine like terms and do a little bit of simplifying, we just have this is y equals 2 sine x. Or, I'm sorry, y equals 2 sine of half x. Layla. Certainly. Let's look at how this changes if I decided to do a cosine as my parent function. If I wanted to write this as a cosine equation instead of a sine equation. Everybody's okay? So I'm still doing the same problem. I'm just giving you an alternative answer. Is one answer right and the other answer wrong? No. Do you have to do both answers? Depends what the directions ask for, right? If it just says write the equation of a sinusoid, then you have your choice. You can do it as a sine function or cosine function. One is fine. If it tells you that it wants you to write the transformation of the parent function sine x, and it's telling you to do it as a sine equation, right? So, and vice versa if it said cosine as the parent, right? All right, so let's do that. So again, we're going to start the same way. Let's remind ourselves of what cosine starts at, or how cosine function looks. So the point we care about is this. The 0.01 is a maximum on our cosine function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my graph that we're given and find a maximum there. Any maximum is fine. I'm going to choose this one. Actually, I could pick any extreme point in all honesty. It could be a minimum also. I'm going to choose to pick a maximum though. That is the point pi, comma 2. Everybody's okay there? So in our transformed function, pi comma 2 is a maximum. So because I'm going maximum to maximum, that tells me that the a is positive. If I had picked the minimum instead and had used that, then the a would be negative, right? But it doesn't matter. I could use either point. You're going to get the a correct answer either way. And now we're going to do the same thing. So, we can transform any point from our parent function by doing cx plus h, ay plus k. Our point from our parent was the point 1, 0. So we're going to have 2x plus h, which we still don't know, 2y plus 0. And that should come out to be the point pi comma 2. So when I plug the 0 in, and for x and the 1 in for h, I get the point h comma 2. So what's that tell me? That h has to be pi. So I have a times cosine of 1 over c x minus h plus k. Or if I wanted to simplify this down, I can just multiply through the 1/2 and then add the 0. And that would be good. Let's do another, yes? Okay. Go write another one in here. All right. A new example. Remind me again, how do we start? Start with the midline. Look at the picture. We're just kind of using our eyes. Where does the midline appear to be? Bladen says at 1. Is that right? I agree. And if I want to check, if I just count up at 6 from there, and then if I count down 6 boxes down, so it is right in the middle. Everybody happy with that? Next thing we look for is the tude, the amplitude.
Yeah. 6.
Well, you got to look at the scale, though.
Oh, wait, it's
So we went from 1 to 4,
3.
so it's 3. So the absolute value of A is 3, so A is plus or minus 3. What's up, Mary? Not for me? Good, that's okay. What's up?
It's okay.
Are you sure? Okay. After we find the amplitude, what do we do next? Period. How do I find the period? I would just count from like peak to peak in a problem like this.
Yeah, which is 1.
So I went from 0 to pi. So the period is just pi. And I remember that the period is the same as 2 pi c. So what is the absolute value of c got to be?
Wait.
So if I take pi and I divide it by 2 pi,
5.
I get a half,
Yeah, you get that.
right? It's just like you solve an equation. So c is going to be plus or minus a half. But what do we always do with c? Yeah, we're just going to always pick it to be positive. Again, you could come up with a correct answer that has a negative c in it, but like I think it makes it harder than it needs to be. I always pick the c to be positive. You can always answer it that way. I've yet to run into a problem where like definitely want to make this one a negative c because it makes it easier. And I've done a lot of these. Everybody's okay? All right. So we've done the hard stuff, or the easy stuff, where we just like pulled some stuff from the graph. If we want to write this as a sine function, I need to choose some midline point somewhere on this graph. Does it matter which midline point I choose? Well, there's, all of these are midline points, right? So I could pick any one of them. Does it matter which one I pick? No, you'll get an equivalent answer any way around it. Let's say for just the sake of argument, I picked this one. So remember on the parent function, 0, 0 is our midline point, and it goes minimum, midline point, maximum. In our transformed function, the point we picked was pi over 4, comma 1, and that was a minimum, midline point, maximum. So what does that tell us? that the sequence of key points is the same tells us that the A value is positive. Everybody all right? If it was maximum midline point minimum, for example, if we had chosen this one, then we would have needed to use a negative A. So it's the value of A is dependent on which of these midline points we're going to choose. Is everybody okay there? What's this starting to tell you? How many different answers do you think you can get for a problem like this? Lots of equivalent answers, right? Lots of equivalent answers. That's okay. All right, and then my last step here is I need to figure out my H. So to do that, I'm going to use this equation. So my parent function point is 0, 0. When I plug in my values for A, C, and K, I don't know H yet. That's all got to equal pi over 4 comma 1. So we end up with H comma 1 should equal pi over 4 comma 1. So H is pi over 4. And then if we simplify that down, 1 over 1/2 is 2. And when I distribute the 2 through, I get 2x. And 2 times pi over 4 is pi over 2. And that's my final answer. What if our parent function was cosine? Now when I choose my point from the graph that I want to use one of the extreme points, a maximum or minimum. So let's say I pick this one at 0, -2. So remember, in the parent function, 0, 1 is the maximum for cosine. And here I have 0, -2, that's a minimum. I notice those are opposite extreme points. So that tells me that the A should be negative. And then we'll do the same mapping. So we have 1/2 times 0 plus H, -3 times 1 plus 1 has to give us 0, -2. Nope. Yeah. That's right. So that tells us then the H has to be 0. So we have y equals -3 cosine 1 over 1/2 x minus 0 plus 1, or simplifying down to 1/2 cosine 2x plus 1. So far, so good? Okay. This is the gist of it. This is it. If we can do one, we can do more. Let me give you guys one and let you guys try it. We'll go through it together in a few minutes. Sound good? Oh no. Okay. I'm gonna put what do you guys say, like 10 minutes on the clock, and then we'll stop and go through stuff? Is that not enough time? Let's do it. Yes, sir. Sure. Sure. So again, try this on your own. At minimum, you should be able to come up with K and then A plus or minus, C plus or minus. That part we should definitely be able to do. And if we're still getting used to figuring out which one is positive or negative and doing it as a sine or cosine, you only have to do one. You do it as a sine or a cosine. Doesn't matter to me. What? Okay. It's all right. It's all right. I try hard not to be offended by much of anything.
The third length of period is just one stretch. It's like
You can do from one extrema to the next extrema will be the length for a period. That's usually easiest. Except in that first example where all we had was like basically one full period was the picture. Sure. So, Sydney, try doing this. So, like, do your little drop down, right click on your notebook and hit close. Yep. And then hit OK when you get the error message. And then we're down at the bottom. We'll go back in where it says more notebooks. Click that. And the notebook you just closed should be like one of the first ones on the list. And just reopen it. and then try pushing a sync and seeing if that clears your errors. Oftentimes that'll alleviate the issue. Oh. Excuse me. Excuse you. No, that's right. Yes.
I'm trying my best. Just getting made fun of.
Well, I guess you gotta try harder then so they don't make fun of you.
I do. You should see my notes. Yes. They're good. There's 2 pages of those. No. We got all of these notes. I don't stop writing. Right here. You're on a different subject right now, bro.
In fairness, like all the notes I write in class are in the OneNote also.
I don't write my notes.
What do you mean?
It says it's not connected. It won't let me sync.
So if you do this, like click up here, and then right click on the notebook and hit close. So try doing that. You'll get a little error message, hit OK.
Yeah, that happened to my note. That keeps happening to my OneNote.
And then when you're, after it's closed, Bladen, go to where it says more notebooks at the bottom of the list. If you click on that, down here, the notebook you just closed should be one of the first ones there. If you reopen it and then sync, it should clear those error messages and things should get moving for you again.
It says it can't connect to server.
Did it do it now? Maybe.
My computer sucks. It's like it doesn't have any space to do anything.
That's annoying. What's all the space taken up by?
My cat.
Oh.
Yeah. For the homework, it won't let me sync it.
How many times do you take the test?
So let's do this. So I'm gonna just close this notebook. I'll get a little error message here. Maybe not. And then we'll open, reopen it.
This whole weekend, it's not like I guess. It wasn't allowed to. He got his
We'll
license.
sync, and that ought to clear all those errors for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if that starts happening again, you should be able to do that same thing in
All right.
clear.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oh man, I hate it when that happens.
He drove 3 hours to Mac. Straight up, he didn't have drive. He didn't have drive.
No, it's 7 hours. I drove back and forth to Chicago twice. No matter what.
That was the 10-minute timer. All right. Stop talking, please. All right, I'm going to start. Should have gotten K to be -2. Should have gotten the amplitude to be 2. So the A should be ±2.
I literally was not. My parents were
The period should be pi. So we'll choose the C to be +1/2. Thanks. All right. So here comes the tricky part. So let's assume that we're doing our parent function is sine x. If we do that, 0, 0 is the reference point that we use. Whenever you're doing sine x, that's the reference point you're going to use. We'll get there in a second. For the resultant function, I need to pick another midline point. So any point that lies on the midline of the function would be okay to use. I'm going to pick this one because its x-coordinate is 0, and that usually makes life a little bit easier. If I look at that midline point, it goes minimum, midline, maximum. So what's that telling me? That the A is positive. And then I'm just going to do my transformation from 0, 0 to 0, -2. So I do c times x plus h, which we don't know yet, comma a times y plus k. And that should give me the point 0, -2. So when I simplify down, that's just h comma -2. So what is h got to be? 0. And that's all she wrote. So just put her all together now. Was that the only answer you could have, only way you could have gotten that? No. How would it have changed? What different choice would have you made to end up with a different answer than what we got here?
If you chose to do like a negative for the
This is the point that we chose from the graph. If you had, say, chosen this point, you'd have a different answer. If you had chosen this point, you'd have a different answer. So like it just depends on a little bit the point that you're choosing. Okay? All right, let's do cosine. If you're doing a cosine function,
what? Wait, did you actually? No, I didn't get it. Oh, yeah, I know.
we're going to be using the point 0, 1 always, Ava. So for the cosine then, since I'm using an extreme point from the parent function, I have to use a extreme point here as well, right? So I'm going to pick this one here at -π/4, -4. Which is a minimum. Since we're going from max to min, that tells me the A should be negative. And just like before, I'm going to be doing my transformation map, and that needs to give me -π/4, comma -4. So when I simplify that down, I get h comma -4. So what should my h be? Needs to be -4 over, I'm sorry, -π/4. So if I simplify this down, one possible answer. Where could I have gotten more possible answers from?
You picked a different one.
If I picked a different extreme point. Reese.
On the test, we don't know exactly because I just pick one to which to the
Yes.
God.
You'll probably be asked to do in both situations. To one specifically or to do both of them. You might be asked to do, wouldn't put it past me. Yes. Correct. All right. I'm just going to give you guys worksheet 3 today. We're not going to assign worksheet 2 yet. I like doing them in this order because what worksheet 2 is going to be the same idea, but instead of giving you the entire graph, just going to give you some information about the graph written in words. Where I think these ones are often a little harder because you don't have a picture to look from. Nope, I'm just talking about what I ended up assigning. I think this is less than what was on the My Notre Dame if you look today.
So we have
Just worksheet 3 right now. And there's only 4 questions on this worksheet 3. You have to do both for sine and cosine answers. So it's kind of like 8 questions, I guess. But
don't put it like
yeah, what's up, Ava? Is worksheet 3. We're going to do worksheet 2 eventually. Just I like doing this one first. All right. So I'm done here for today. You guys should take the next, I don't know, whatever we have left, 15, 20, 25 minutes or something. And start your homework. While you have a chance to ask questions, while it's fresh in your brain.
Is it cool if Lions are 4-1?
I know.
The Lions won again.
I know. It's a weird year.
Since 2011 or 9, it was one of those.
Is the last time they were 4-1 at this point in the season?
They have Buccaneers next week. It's another one. I think they'll lose 3 or 4. They're going for the
3 or 4?